many objects, so I'm going to sit down, including this clicker. Yeah, there's a lot going on here. How's everyone doing today? Good? I want everyone to get sort of your blood pumping. So we are going to be somewhat interactive in this session because maybe like me, you had one more glass of rosé than you intended to last night and need to wake up. So I'm Amy Nelson, the CEO of Venture for America. Oh, that's my face. And I am going to talk to you a little bit about why we do what we do. I want to sort of pull a Simon Sinek on us and be like, why do all of us in this room spend our days, our lives, our careers supporting the next generation of entrepreneurs, helping them build businesses and really create value in their communities? Why are we doing this thing? So, who agrees with this statement? Show of hands. All right, that is not universal. So if you agree with this statement, let's shout out some reasons. Shout it out. Motivation is a?
Sure, motivation.
Okay. Inspiration. Value creation. Okay, what does value creation mean to you?
Let me rephrase that. Values creation. So
Values creation.
Not just financial, but really social impact and environmental impact as well. So I think the definition of values creation is not different.
Okay, so entrepreneurs perhaps are uniquely situated to move forward some of the societal challenges that we have and create values and uphold our values. Cool. Any other ideas? Opportunity. What do you mean by opportunity?
If you can't get the job you want, you create it.
Create your own job. All right, I love that. So not everyone had their hand raised. If you disagree with this statement, tell me why. Yeah.
I think we have a lot of entrepreneurs who just need to create better tools for them to succeed. Like we have a lot of people who are dream of starting companies but might not have the opportunity to or might not have the tools or resources that they need to use.
So we totally agree on that. So what you're saying is we need to make it perhaps easier for people to start a business, but we have a lot of people who have the capacity, the desire, the intellect to make this happen. So here's why I think this is important. Entrepreneurship has been like rapidly declining in our country for the last really almost 40 years now, and the last 10 years has been the most dramatic. And so what this says is if you take all the firms in the world or in the country and you take the percentage that started in the last year that are less than 1 year old, and then the percentage that, decided to roll up shop, we are now in a position that the number of new firms is actually lower than the firms who are opening up. So when I was growing up, in like the 80s and the 90s, we were minting 100,000 net new companies in our country every year. So if you took the number of new companies, subtracted out the ones that closed up, you got 100,000 net new companies. Does anyone know what that number is today? Any ideas? Just throw something out there. 30,000. It is actually negative. It is negative between 50 and 70,000 and has been negative every year since 2008. So we have not fully recovered from the recession, and this is the landscape that we're all up against. People are not starting companies. But why does it matter that people aren't starting companies? And it's many of the reasons that you all are talking about. But the most important reason, in my opinion, is that entrepreneurship, firms that are less than 5 years old, are actually responsible for 100% of the new jobs in our economy. So companies that are more than 5 years old are actually either destroying or not at all creating jobs. So if we don't have new companies coming into the market, we don't have new jobs. So this is the reason why our economy has, instead of creating about 3 million new jobs every year, is now creating only about 1.5 million. And this is a huge problem. All right, what's even worse is that my generation, the millennial generation, has decided that yes, we would love to start companies. However, we are not actually doing it, right? In 1989, more than 10% of all the privately held companies in this country were owned by someone 30 or younger. Now, less than 4%. This is terrifying, right? So this means that the private companies that are out there have either been held or started by someone who is far, far older. And so does anyone have a notion as to why young people are not starting businesses? What is the number one reason that they cite? Yes. Yes, oh my God, you're so smart. Student loan debt is the number one thing that our emerging generation cites as the reason they are not starting businesses. We have 45 million Americans, I am one of them, who have a total of 1.5 trillion with a T in student loan debt. And that sort of capital burden constrains our choices, prevents us from doing things that are creative. And also we have an entire in my opinion, economic sort of a culture that rewards following the pack. You know, fully 40% of Harvard's most recent graduating class went into banking or consulting. If you add in law school and big tech, that's 60%. This is what our human capital is doing year after year. There's nothing in our culture that tells you that you should take a risk, be innovative. But there's a lot that tells you how to be an extraordinary syllabus follower, how to follow all the rules and get an A, how to jump through all of the hoops. But you know, people like Victor are trying to change that over at Yale, but this is not yet the culture that we have for young people. So right now, tons of barriers, both cultural and structural, to entrepreneurship. And people like us in the room are trying to change that. This is the student loan debt slide. Capital's not available. And so at Venture for America, what we're really trying to do is identify recent college graduates who think differently, who want to use their careers as a platform, really for creating opportunity, not just for themselves, but also others, and do that in a values-driven way. So you're exactly right. And what we do is we go around the country to places like Yale, but also to places like Appalachian State, and find entrepreneurial students. It's a highly selective program. And then I believe the next slide shows what we do. Yes. And then we basically place those fellows with startups and growth companies in one of 14 cities across the country. And those are cities like Detroit, New Orleans, Baltimore, my hometown of St. Louis. And the idea is that you're kind of like an apprentice. You spend 2 years, right-hand man or woman to an existing entrepreneur, seeing them make mistakes, so maybe you don't have to when it's your turn to start a company, being part of an amazing network of people who also want to use their careers to create opportunity. And then at the end, if you want to start a business, we have our own accelerator program. My colleague Barry, who runs it, is in the house today, as well as capital and other resources to get you started. So our goal is really to be sort of the good housekeeping seal of approval so that your accelerator programs, when you see Venture for America, are going to be like, oh, that's a big deal. And we've had fellows go through, I know ERA and Techstars are in the house, programs like that. So that's how we work. What else do I have in here? And so if you are in a position to influence a young person to join Venture for America, the reasons that they might do this is really this exceptional professional development. We spend a month training them, 2 years on the job learning, this network where you're really going to be with, now we'll actually welcome our 1,000th fellow this summer, so it's getting kind of legit, into a community where there's just a ton of positive peer pressure to start something. They all live in the same houses, and they're like, what are you starting? What are you starting? And don't you wish when you were 24, 25, someone would have said, like, not how are you going to build your resume? How are you going to platform yourself into the next shiny thing? But like, what are you going to do? What are you actually going to create? So that's what we're all about. And what do I have next here? So this is how to get a hold of me. Please do. I am an email ninja. I respond within 24 hours to literally everyone. But I hope that this was instructive for you. We're going to have a little bit of a panel now, but at the end of the day, this is a country that was really predicated on this notion that immigrants could come here or strivers could achieve their dream by building something really incredible and passing that on for their family. And entrepreneurship is still our greatest tool for wealth creation, for job creation. And we've turned away from that as a society. And I'm really inspired that there are so many people in this room who've decided that like their goal with their careers is really to help change that tide and to help really build this next generation of entrepreneurs. So thanks for having me.
Amazing. Thank you, Amy. And you can just stay seated there. So I actually want to build off of the point that Amy's making with her keynote there in terms of what's the greater trend that's allowing our programs and our platforms to become something that everybody's looking to engage with. And so to extend that conversation, we've got Tanya from 500 Startups ready to come up and join us, John from Techstars, and Ricardo Marvao from Beta I. So please welcome them. I'll get comfy in the middle. It's okay. Wow, cool. So, like I said, I want to hear from sort of each of you first. your kind of ideas on sort of what Amy's perspective just was in terms of what's going on in the greater economy and society that's enabling so much engagement in accelerator programs, sure, but also the acceptance of studios, incubators, and other innovation platforms. But before we do that, can you just introduce yourselves? So John, if you want to start off.
Yeah, so my name is John Hill. I'm the VP of Network at Techstars. My role is to cross-connect the relational network that we have at Techstars globally, on and offline. Best way to represent me is I'm kind of like Morgan Freeman in the Shawshank Redemption. I'm the guy who can get you things. Techstars is my prison yard.
It is.
Probably a bad analogy, but you understand what I'm talking about. But I represent the 40-plus accelerators we have in 15 countries, all of the alumni that have gone through, sitting at about 4,500 founders, closing in on 2,000 companies, and then Startup Weekend and Startup Weeks around the world. We do those in about 150 countries, and we're sitting on about 4,700 community leaders that participate in that. We're mentor-driven as accelerators, and we have about 10,000 mentors that are associated with us and about 10,000 investors that are connected into our sphere. So relatively large entity working around the world. We are the worldwide network that helps entrepreneurs succeed, and go from there.
Amazing pitch. Hello? Hello? Yeah. Hi. My name is Ricardo. I'm the co-founder of BTI. We are based in Lisbon, Portugal, and we started back in 2010. I guess you may remember we had a country that was bankrupt, so we started as a non-profit. Today we're a for-profit company, but we started because the young generation was really in need of seeing a solution to get out of the crisis. So today we have a big accelerator that we run in Lisbon, and we invest also with our own funds. We also have corporate innovation. We do about 16 programs this year. We bring about 1,000 startups a year to Portugal and from all over the world. But we also started a big education area that I run, where we give basically courses to executive education, university students, and also kids, for them to understand also how entrepreneurship can help them understand better how the risk or failure can be a positive thing and not something that should be seen as negative.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Tanya Soman. I'm a venture partner at 500 Startups. We are a global venture capital seed fund, an accelerator program based in San Francisco. But we are very global focused. So our accelerator program invests in anywhere from 80 companies to maybe 100 companies a year. These companies are global, so we invest in all different countries, 74 countries to date. We're very active investors and have invested in 2,200 companies and counting over the past 10 years. Our focus is on seed stage and helping companies with growth and fundraising. So we kind of have the belief that talent is everywhere, but resources are not. So we try to kind of lend our expertise to different markets. We have people in 25 countries and are constantly looking for founders and entrepreneurs.
Cool, and we already know Amy so well. So, and so we're going to dive in, but before we do, warning to you all, panels today are, we really want them to be audience driven. So you can consider the conversation that's about to happen an effort to stall for you. We're buying you time. So think of the questions that you want to ask. This is a huge opportunity to get some very cutting edge perspective on what's going on. Yes, in accelerators, but entrepreneurship and innovation everywhere. So make the most of it. And we will be inviting your questions as soon as you have them. So in the meantime, let's start. You know, and given Amy's wonderful introduction and perspective on what's happening at a higher level that's enabling so much participation in these programs, what do you all think? Why that's happening?
Everybody's looking at me, so I guess I'll start. So, you know, I actually want to step back for a moment, and then I'll talk about some of the motivations for founders specifically and what they're looking for. But we started in 2007, so we're approaching year 12 as a accelerator program and kind of an umbrella around accelerators, innovation, entrepreneurialism. And a lot has changed in that time period. But we were talking earlier, like we were in it when this was the Wild West, and it's no longer the Wild West. The structures are starting to come into place, which is representative of conferences like this, which would not have existed at the beginning. And while that has all changed and we are starting to become very streamlined in our approach, and it's still a little bit chaotic, but we're getting streamlined in our approach to support entrepreneurs, the motivations of entrepreneurs have not changed at all. And we're just getting better at positioning our structures to support them. And so I can tell you the motivation for every founder really revolves around three things. They're looking for help for fundraising. They're looking for help for talent, for hiring, with businesses, essentially biz dev, corp dev, for proof of concept. Do that here well for any of the companies that come into our sphere, they're going to be successful. What has changed over the last few years is big corporations have figured that out as well. And so now they can pull all of those companies into their sphere, leverage their networks to support those companies and their growth patterns. And that's only beneficial. The more people who are helping entrepreneurs out, the more successful we all are playing in this space. So that's kind of my take on it.
By the way, we started something like this as a Wild West trial back in 2013, and we grew to about 80 accelerators in Europe, and it was amazing learning. But I think for us, at least in Europe, one of the things that we see is, I mean, economy is not the same. We were suffering in Europe, and I guess in US as well. So in a moment of crisis is when typically people reach out to entrepreneurship, and because that's typically the way that you can get out of the crisis or where you need. So for us, now we see a lot more players in it. A lot corporates, universities, I mean, you name it. Anyone is on acceleration. And those that aren't are seen as like the not cool. But before, I remember when back in 2011, 12, a corporate would come to our space and see some startups and it's like, this is a startup. Okay, nice, get a job. And I mean, I remember there's a funny story about TalkDesk, which was a startup I passed by 500. And it's two founders, a couple, and they basically got out of university. They wanted to start a startup. And there was a professor at the university that would still have a list of every single student and where they were going or where they wanted to go. Consulting, bank, insurance, whatever. And they said, we want to build a startup. He wrote unemployment. Okay? And so that was the mindset. Today is completely different. And I think, I mean, not everyone needs to be an entrepreneur. That's why so many people work for so many companies. And entrepreneurship is really hard. I think the only thing that's harder is raising a fund. But yeah, I mean, that's my take.
Yeah, I think I'm kind of in line with both of those sentiments. I think entrepreneurship has also been a tool to kind of get out of an ecosystem or get out of an economy that might not be doing well, particularly for when we're looking at companies on a global scale, right? Like I know we were talking about the US and domestically, there are a lot of resources here and, well, at least in comparison to, a global scale. And over the past, in my experience, 5 years, I've seen so many players enter the space as well. And I think things have been changing for the better. So a few years ago, we had corporates constantly coming in, no offense to any corporates here, but we'd call it the Silicon Valley petting zoo. Corporates would come in, they would play with the animals, and then they would leave. And over the years, that's completely changed, right? We have much more engaging conversations. We have startups that are working hands-on with companies. We have startups that understand how to navigate that space, and they're mutually beneficial. But I do think it's taken some time to kind of understand why that's mutually beneficial. And I think that's just one example of how players have entered the space and been able to provide value and kind of accelerate entrepreneurship and helping entrepreneurs.
Great. So part of what we hear there is, well, the needs of entrepreneurs have always been the same and always need to be served. So we have just a great opportunity to do that as the space grows. But also, entrepreneurship has been a way for people to solve and create opportunity for themselves in times when maybe that doesn't exist. And in a post-2008 world, I think that can resonate. So we have, that means, an enormous opportunity right now because all of our programs are growing. I mean, you have all built organizations that are national and international on a global scale, affecting thousands of people, whether they're investors, startups, mentors, corporates, you name it. These are massive networks that you're helping lead. What are the risks to that? How do we continue supporting the public trust and engagement as the opportunity grows? What should we be worried about?
I'll hazard something. So as you all are saying, like the entire accelerator incubator ecosystem has just like come out of nowhere and grown tremendously. I am very encouraged by the people in this room because it's a very diverse audience, which is not always the case. And I think that the challenge with networks like this is that they tend to replicate themselves, right? And so our opportunity and really challenge that I would give all of us who run accelerators and innovation programs is to really deeply examine our practices around diversity, equity, and inclusion, and to make sure that we are not simply reproducing what existed before and being really, really intentional about the fact that, yes, entrepreneurship is something that certain people find achievable, but is still really, there are huge numbers of historically excluded communities who still don't have that level of access. And so how can we make sure that we're being proactive in our approach so that wealth creation and income inequality don't continue to just deepen?
I'm just we're among peers, so I'm gonna be totally honest. I think we're all in the bubble. I mean, we live in a silo. And because we do this on a daily basis, maybe we think everyone knows this, but there's a lot of people that still don't engage with this community and are super important. Policymakers, governments, public in general. I mean, they see a startup and they think, Mark Zuckerberg, you're gonna get millions, and they don't understand the concept. Policymakers are doing laws that are basically driven for the Googles, Facebooks, Amazons of this life, and not for the tiny startup that then will reach a point where her or his business will be important to have pass a certain requirement of a law. And because that was thought for a Facebook or a Google, they don't have the resources, financial or human or time, to really embark into a task force of lawyers that can go through all the requirements and pass them to the next phase. So they don't go forward. And because the politicians engage with the startups and the government only sees the big players, then, I mean, I think there's a huge task from all of us to engage with those stakeholders.
I can definitely, I agree with both of these points. I will take a different perspective. So I think that, part of the challenges are, yes, helping founders and help building these ecosystems, but there are two other pieces I think that are really important that sometimes get left out. So there's the education bit, right? So there's like leveraging education to explain the opportunity, just make it aware to a lot of these ecosystems, and then also building the investor ecosystem. So in a lot of different markets, you see that there are people who want to be founders or who are trying to start their own businesses, but they don't have investors. And so you're not building a venture company if you don't have venture capitalists. So I think that's also where we've put some of our time in helping to engage the investor community. Investors are so much more risk averse overseas. And so they're very hesitant to invest in anything, honestly, pre-A or B round, which is where you need it the most. And so a lot of the help there is non-investment help. It's maybe mentorship, which I don't discount whatsoever, but companies need capital to scale. That's like one of the number one reasons why companies fail. So I think some of the risk is also on the investor perspective, that those investors are educated, understand, if you don't invest in your market, they're going to leave and go to the US and go to Silicon Valley where money seems abundant, right? So I think it's also developing that side of the kind of table.
Yeah, I have two pieces on this. One is the support that entrepreneurs need to be successful. To Ricardo's point, like being an entrepreneur is like jumping off a cliff. And Reid Hoffman actually has a great quote about that. It's like jumping off the cliff and trying to build a plane before you hit the ground. And you know, just to prove out, like this room is a bubble, but it is a special bubble. So by a show of hands, if a entrepreneur came to you and said, "Hey, I need your help. I need to talk to you about something," by a show of hands, how many of you would take that call? All right, and if you don't raise your hand, especially in this room, you're going to hell. And by the way, I don't have that power, and I'm Irish Catholic, so I'm going to feel guilty about that for the next 24 hours. But the point is, all of you raise your hand. What's important is for you to go back to your respective communities and get everybody else to raise their hand, to be open to support entrepreneurs. And that we are just at the beginning of that. The other thing is we have a prescriptive approach right now on development of accelerators and innovation that's happening within corporations. As we go country by country, U.S. drives a lot of what's happening on application rest of world right now. That's starting to shift dramatically. But like if you look at a community like Oslo, entrepreneurs are afraid to put the word entrepreneur, startup, founder on their LinkedIn profile. The reason they are is because in that culture, if you stand out, it's a flat culture. The janitor and the prime minister are the same. It doesn't look good on you. So how do you build an entrepreneurial community when people can't say they're an entrepreneur? If you go to Singapore, like we have this ethos called give first. So the idea in our network, somebody reaches out to you, they're available to you, whether there's something in it for them on the opposite side. In Singapore, how business takes place is if I help you, you will help me. And it's a cultural aspect. It's just different from what we import as that cultural aspect. If you go to South Africa, what's amazing is some of the penetration that the companies have there. They penetrate high verticals, high percentage of the audience within their respective markets, but they don't jump rest of the world because their next nearest market is Nigeria, 9 hours away, right? So those are the things that are larger global challenges that we've got to overcome as we go along.
Wow, I could not have asked for 4 more interesting answers. And I think they're incredibly representative of some of the things we really do want to focus on today. So I mean, it seemed one of the sort of overlaps was in terms of access. And from Amy's perspective, that has to do with identity and making sure that all different backgrounds and economic statuses are given a channel to participate. At the same time, Ricardo's thinking about how that access can be generated between entities in society, whether that's government or larger businesses or even earlier stages of school. I mean, you heard him say before they're working with middle schools and high schools, right? Tanya talked a little bit about the importance of diversity and access in capital. And I think John's perspective, focusing on helping the entrepreneur as a route to greater access. If we are all better culturally at supporting entrepreneurs, then maybe that helps access emerge. So, incredible. Thank you all. We are still stalling for you, so when you have questions, do raise your hand. But, Marcos, okay. Go for it.
Yeah, if we can have the panel address the idea of the diversity and inclusion geographically. The mega regions are taking the lion's share economically, globally. How do you bring in all of the potential talent from those non-mega region areas where there's possibly all sorts of fantastic entrepreneurs in waiting?
Wonderful. And since, as John said, this is a special room with people that are all involved in this space, please introduce yourself when you ask a question. So Marcos, can you just say a little bit about what you're working on?
I have another request, which is that people use the spare wireless mic, which is
Oh, great.
on the stream.
So Jolie is live streaming the entire event and recording it for us. So he needs the microphone to be recording the question. So Marcos, introduce yourself. But in the meantime, for anybody that couldn't register the question, it's about how do you create support and access to entrepreneurship if you're not in New York City or if you're not in Silicon Valley, or if you're not in Boulder, or some of the other great startup communities in the world. So anybody want to start with that?
I'll take a stab. This might not be the most scalable answer, but go there, right? We try to make ourselves available, or at least I think that's the most accessible way for founders. I think we're all at companies that are known, and yet when we enter a new city, people say, oh yeah, I know, 500, I just don't know anyone there. And so we're on the internet, right? But that doesn't seem intimate enough for founders or individuals or entrepreneurs to reach out. Forget about just founders and entrepreneurs, partners, corporates, other investors, co-investors. And so being able to put yourself on the ground, going to these communities, going to the ecosystems, going overseas, taking the really long flight, and being on the ground and like establishing connection, I think has been what has paid off most for us. It is not scalable.
Well, that's literally what we do at Venture for America, is encourage young people to move to, Detroit and Cleveland. But my favorite factoid from last year was that it cost 4 times as much to rent a U-Haul leaving the Bay Area than going to the Bay Area, because supply and demand, people are leaving in droves. And we're really just at the beginning of this wave that people are rejecting sky-high rents and like the constraints that go along with living in a place like where we are right now. For really a higher quality of life and lower cost of living, because I think a lot of VCs are sick of spending all of their money paying rents to Silicon Valley landlords, both in the form of wages and in overheads for office space. So it is starting to change, and I think a lot of it is just destigmatizing place.
I mean, totally. The amount of people coming to Lisbon is amazing. The foreigners, I mean, it's all over the place. From New York, a lot of people. I think people are getting to the state where they really want good quality of life. And if they are in a market or a country where it's easy to start and not a lot of, and entrepreneurs need that. I mean, San Francisco is so expensive. So for us, the way we did was exactly what Amy was talking about. Basically, we brought a lot of people in so that people had connections, and then from there it was a first step to really, okay, now if I need a contact in the Bay Area or New York or something, I already have a contact, and from there I can reach other people. And for us, it's a tiny market. We're 10 million people, but bringing people in and showing, and when we started back in 2010, no one remembered Lisbon. And today we're starting to see that there is a good set of startups that are really growing, 3 unicorns, a lot of really good startups growing abroad. So for us, it was just building the ecosystem.
Let me ask you a question. When you're talking about mega cities, you're talking about hyper-economic zones, right? Like San Francisco, New York, London. And then you're saying
Sure.
the areas in between
New York, Washington.
providing access to anybody else, right? For entrepreneurship.
How do you reach them?
How do you reach them? How do you communicate?
Access that potential talent?
So I absolutely agree. You have to be there. And one of the things that we've tried to do at Techstars, we don't have a physical accelerator in San Francisco, and we believe that entrepreneurship can happen anywhere, and we will support that anywhere. So we have accelerators in Detroit, Kansas City. 2 days ago, I was speaking at our accelerator in Indianapolis, which are non-traditional areas to grow companies. We also have a VP of Diversity and Inclusion, Jason Thompson, who's really helped the whole company culture think about how we find the best entrepreneurs, the best ideas, and support those entrepreneurs and ideas. And if you think about any of the companies that you've helped support, for the first 25 hires that they have, they generally recruit out of network, first and second level connections, which means they recruit out of people who look and act like them. And what we're trying to do is break that dynamic on how we approach getting companies into our pipeline, and we're accessing networks that are different from the networks we have traditionally looked at. And we'll continue to go down that route and that approach to make sure that we're supportive of anybody who has a good idea.
Thank you. all. And Marcos, please introduce yourself real quick because I skipped over.
Marcos Dinnerstein, A Better Mousetrap newsletter and blog, formerly digital.nyc editor, content creator.
Bill, one of the largest newsletters in New York City. Richa, go ahead.
Hi, my name is Richa Agarwal. I run the Brooklyn Fashion Design Accelerator. My question is just kind of piggyback off Marcus's around diversity and inclusion, and in connection with just capital, right? So when you are looking at communities of color or women entrepreneur of color, there is, we all know there's a serious lack of capital for these communities. I would like to ask all of you, what are you seeing in terms of patient capital as an access point for these communities? Because, when in the ventures that I've supported, especially for women of color, the VCs are looking for the same type of return. Like, they're not, some of these companies are, very young and they have business models that also demonstrate social impact, not just, financial impact. But the expectation from the VC community is that they'll be generating the same type of rate of return. So how do we look at that, or how do we shift that conversation? Because there's just not enough money, for the social impact businesses.
So how do we create a longer return cycle for investing that can support impact over time?
Yeah, and how do we convince, all of these VCs that claim that they want to make a social impact, but don't actually follow through on what they're professing?
Understood.
I'm seeing a lot of interesting stuff in terms of revenue-based financing and venture debt and other sorts of vehicles. And the fact of the matter is only about 1% of businesses in this country even are VC eligible. And then there's another 15% for whom there is some kind of financing vehicle, which means there's 84% for whom there is not currently an appropriate tool. And I would challenge anyone who has capital to think about that, because there are ways to earn a return. It's not going to be sort of the exponential VC return to get enough capital in someone's hand that they can get started. And a lot of communities have incredible things. There's a Jewish free loan fund. If you are Jewish and you need working capital up to $100,000, you can take out a loan and pay zero interest. The SBA has opportunities for minority entrepreneurs, but they still require certain credit score credentialing. And so if you've been redlined, or if you're just not old enough to have a good credit score yet, these tools are not available to you. And so I would say, each of these local communities, though, have foundations, have pension funds, have massive amounts of capital. If they just took a sliver of those endowments and put them toward these alternative vehicles, the potential would be enormous.
And we have time for one more response if anyone wants to venture. No?
So I share a quick anecdote. Ricardo and I were talking earlier. We now have a program in Lisbon. And Hugo, who is the managing director there, actually came out of Ricardo's pipeline. And I actually think that represents where the biggest opportunities are. It's the flywheel, people coming back into the system and reinvesting. How many of you work in accelerators, work directly with companies? All right. So if you help educate them about things like B Corps or Pledge 1%, right? The importance of giving back, it's the cultivation of giving that then supports some of these, creates investors downstream that have an understanding of the importance of supporting, say, sustainable companies. So I think it's, it's similar to this becoming a conference around accelerators, right, and innovation. We need to cultivate, holistically, the idea around investing in those types of companies.
Wonderful. Thank you. And that's actually something we'll be talking about later today, is how capital is diversifying. No, I'm not going to stop pitching this summit, even though you're already here. But that's it. That's all the time we have with this amazing panel. Thank you all so much for joining us. We can move